Oh, are we ready? Everybody ready? Okay. I think we're live. My name is Rick Grossberg. I am director of the Coastal and Marine Sciences Institute at UC Davis, and I want to welcome you to our Earth Day celebration. Happy Earth Day to everybody. I want to wish my wife a happy birthday today too. Happy birthday, Laura. And I want to welcome you all joining us with Craig Musburger, a videographer, and Leslie Guerrero. Leslie Guerrero is the co-host of this evening's panel discussion, quote unquote, panel discussion and Q&A about sort of the relationship between Earth Day, the making of a movie like Chasing Coral, and how these kinds of pieces fit together in raising the public's awareness of coastal and marine sustainability and how we make our ecosystems more resilient and more productive. So first, I want to introduce Leslie Guerrero. Leslie is a PhD student in integrative genetics and genomics, and she's also one of the trainees in our NSF-funded Sustainable Oceans Research Traineeship Program at UC Davis. She's working with Rachel Bay, and she studies the interaction between genetic variation and climate change in marine organisms. And then take it away, Leslie.
Thank you, Rick. I also want to echo Rick's happy Earth Day to everyone who's here. And thank you for spending some of your evening with us. And a special thank you to my co-panelists this evening, Dr. Craig Musburger. So Craig earned his bachelor's in biology from Colorado College before moving to Palau to become a tourist dive guide. And it was during this time in Palau that Craig gained some real and practical knowledge about coral reefs. And after this time here, he moved to Hawaii, where he went to graduate school at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, and received his MS and PhD in zoology and marine biology. Craig's dissertation work was focused on coral reef fish biogeography. And this work allowed him to dive in remote locations all over the Pacific. And so we're super excited to have him here. He, as Rick mentioned, was one of the videographers on the documentary Chasing Coral. So welcome, Craig. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Leslie, Rick,
yeah,
everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So just some logistical things. Craig and I are going to have a brief description. We hope that you all who are attending fill up your questions in the Q&A over the course of our discussion, and then we'll be able to kind of ping pong and answer some of your questions that you've brought with you today. So really looking forward to the opportunity to interact with you all in that manner. Yeah, so first I want to start by asking Craig what his role was in filming the Chasing Coral documentary that we got to watch recently, and have him share a little bit of your perspective, I guess, throughout the filming and what you were able to observe.
Sure. So I was thinking about this. I rewatched the movie last night, and I was thinking back to the making of it, and the way it kind of came together for my involvement. I believe it was like a Monday afternoon, and I got a phone call out of the blue from Larissa Rhodes, the producer of the film, saying, "We need someone immediately to get to American Samoa." I didn't know anything about the film at this point. I didn't know what they were up to. The director, Jeff Orlowski, was, I believe, off in some part of Cuba and was unreachable at the time. He was on a remote liveaboard dive boat or something at the time, couldn't be reached. So Larissa reached out to me, knowing that I had done a lot of work in Samoa in the past. And the reason they needed a film crew to get to Samoa is because the NOAA Coral Reef Watch modeling, Mark Eakin and the NOAA folks that make predictions about bleaching events were shouting from the rooftop saying there is about to be a major bleaching event happening in Samoa. And the Chasing Coral crew was trying to be on scene as these things happen. And so Larissa, the producer, said, all right, Richard Beavers, the kind of main character sort of in Chasing Coral, is on his way. He's flying to Hawaii from Australia. you've got to meet him at the airport and get down to Samoa like pronto and shoot this bleaching event. So within, I think, 2 days, we were packed up. My longtime assistant, Griff, and we met Richard at the Honolulu airport. I was living in Hawaii at the time. And we flew to Samoa and started diving. We spent about a week there, diving on a couple of different locations where the NOAA models and the local scientists that we were partnering with down there were saying, this is where it's going to happen. This is where the water is really hot. Let's get in the water. And by the time we handled all the logistics and got in the water, the bleaching had happened. And a lot of the sequences in the film introducing bleaching in the film and all of the stuff in American Samoa is what I was responsible for shooting. And we spent 7 days diving down there, largely two kind of main locations, places that I had been several times in the past and seen them when they were healthy. And to get there and jump in the water and see what we saw was just a tragedy. I mean, it's beautiful. They mention this in the film, you know, a very recently bleached reef is kind of gorgeous looking. You know, there's still these really delicate branching coral structures, but the color is stark white. And if you've dove on healthy coral reefs, you know that's not what it's supposed to look like, right? But we were still in the very early stages of bleaching at that point in Samoa. And we spent a week just swimming over, I'm not going to say miles, but many, many, many meters of completely bleached Acropora coral, staghorn coral. And I mean, it was devastating to see that kind of stuff. Like I said, I'd done a lot of work in Samoa in the past and knew these locations pretty well. And when I had been down there 2 years prior, 5 years prior, things were really healthy and looking really good. So to get there was good in the sense that we got the footage we needed to introduce bleaching in this film, but terrible to have to be in a position to film that. And, you know, a lot of my work over that kind of time period through those successive summers of really hot water focused around coral bleaching became a really important time to document it. And so during Chasing Coral and beyond, I mean, coral bleaching was what I spent a lot of time underwater taking pictures of. Unfortunately, my preference is to go and film beautiful reefs and spectacular colors and lots of fish life and healthy ecosystems. But, you know, that wasn't the task at hand here. It was document this phenomenon and help get the word out to the world about what's happening on our reefs.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And so when you talk about hot water, like what range of temperatures are you experiencing when you're filming that?
That water, it was probably pushing about 84, 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Real warm. It's an interesting spot. A lot of the sequences that they chose to use in the film came from this one reef that's kind of close to the airport. It's kind of on the, if anyone's ever been to Pago Pago, American Samoa, on the opposite side of the airport from where the gates are and the baggage claim, whatever. I'm not really going to call it a terminal because it's just kind of a open air area that you go and get your bags when you fly in. But on the opposite side of the runway from there, there's a semi-sheltered lagoon area, and the water there can get warm. But when we start to get up to 84, 85 degrees, that's too warm, even for the very tropical waters of American Samoa that can be warm in a normal year. But that's just beyond the threshold, and the corals had all gone white.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's really incredible that the videography is you're able to capture this moment in a video and share it with people, because only such a small population is even able to see the coral reefs. And so it's a very important tool in order to help communicate what is actually happening, and then bring it to the awareness of global populations. And I don't know, I feel like, that wouldn't be possible without capturing it in real time and sharing it with people. So I guess I'm just curious, what motivated you to get started with videography, and what was that path like for you to start working with that and filming the reefs?
I mean, what inspired me to start filming reefs was that I loved being underwater, and I loved my experiences on what were healthy reefs. I started scuba diving in 1985. So that is, where are we now? 35 years ago. Man, I'm getting old. And, we didn't know a ton about coral bleaching at that point. There were a few scientists that were documenting it and were starting to talk about it. But at that point in time, scuba diving itself is a very young pursuit. We've only been doing this kind of underwater exploration for 70 years or so, and I feel super lucky to have gotten involved in diving at a really young age, been able to travel to lots of places around the world, seeing reefs. And my passion is not to film bleached coral reefs. I want to be able to go out and take beautiful pictures of healthy things and systems doing what natural systems can do. I mean, every time I go diving, I see something that I've never seen before. And I've done a lot of diving, but that still happens because there's amazing discoveries still to be made. And unfortunately, with the change that is happening underwater, those chances are running out. And a film like Chasing Coral, I'm so proud to be a part of it, just because it did reach an audience that's different from the audience that I presume is here tonight, that are university affiliated folks that are doing active research on coral reefs. I mean, I presume the way this event was publicized, most of the audience here is somehow connected to UC Davis or some other marine program. You guys all know what coral bleaching is, but most of the world doesn't. And it's really important that we continue to shout from the rooftops and tell people what is happening underwater. Because since I started diving in the 1980s, the change is seismic. The number of healthy reefs that still exist on planet Earth is dwindling every day and every year. And, I am a trained research scientist, but I figured out early on in my graduate school career that I wasn't headed for a research position. To me, as important as scientific research is, and I absolutely think it is one of the most important pursuits we have here on planet Earth, I feel like we know so much right now. The scientists have done so much important science that the world still doesn't know about. And I've figured out that my role in this kind of science communication continuum is to try to help the non-scientists understand what the scientists have been concerned about now for years. And we know that coral reefs are dying, and we know what we need to do to stop them from dying. We've got to stop burning this much fossil fuel. We've got to stop putting this much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It's warming things up. It's making things more acidic, a problem that doesn't get a ton of attention in Chasing Coral, but which might even be a more serious problem than the warming issue. The science is there. We know these things to be the strong drivers of the change that's hurting coral reefs. And we've got to get more people on board. We've got to start communicating in different ways. We've got to start talking to people that don't spend their time scuba diving on coral reefs. I know that my experience is not what most people in the United States, or for that matter, anywhere else in the world, the experience that they have with reefs. Most people, have seen a couple of pictures or have gone to an aquarium in their local town or city, but they've never seen what real beauty there is underwater and what a function those reefs serve. Um, it's not just about saving pretty things. It's about saving things that provide ecosystem function, that provide food to many, many people around planet Earth, and that keep our species alive. I've done a lot of work in very small, isolated islands where the only source of protein comes from the coral reef. A low-lying atoll in the Marshall Islands, sure, there might be a couple of pigs on land, or they might eat some birds or bats, but the vast majority of the protein that those people consume comes from the coral reef. And through no fault of theirs, those coral reefs are dying. And people in places like the Marshall Islands and the Gilbert Islands and the Maldives, and Kiribati, they're facing the real possibility of needing to leave their homes and to relocate because they're going to run out of food. And to further exacerbate their problems, many of these low-lying atoll places, they're sinking because the ice caps are melting and that sea level is rising. And there's real people on planet Earth who are being affected by this. And the need to convince those of us that live in the developed world that are contributing to this problem, the need to communicate to them what is happening has never been more dire, because we're talking, 5 years, 10 years from now, there are going to be real impacts in terms of human life and human relocation. I don't know. I don't even know what your question was. I think I'm just kind of rambling at this point. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I originally asked just like about your trajectory from being interested in coral reefs and then introducing videography. And
I totally did not answer
as
your
a
question.
researcher, I'm also interested in how your academic studies and videography, how if you were able to incorporate those together at all, or if one enhanced the other in any sort of way. And if you have any tips for students who might be interested in kind of getting involved in the science communication.
Yeah, wow, that's like several questions there.
Some advice in that respect.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. I'll slow down, sorry.
So let's see, how did my academic pursuits jibe with my videography? So like you said in the intro, my dissertation research in graduate school centered on reef fish biogeography. So what I looked at was the distribution of reef fish species across a broad area of the central and western and a little bit into the southern Pacific. I was based in Hawaii and I traveled, I went to 38 different islands for my research, my dissertation research, carrying out in situ scuba reef fish surveys. And to do that kind of scope of work, it took me a long time. I was in graduate school for a very long time, but I worked for NOAA as part of the Coral Reef Ecosystem Division. That gave me access to the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, the Line Islands and Phoenix Islands, Wake Atoll, a little bit out towards Western Pacific into Guam and the Mariana Islands. Worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, hit some of the Southern Line Islands and Vanuatu and the Cook Islands, Johnston Atoll, and then partnered with lots of different small government and non-government agencies around the Pacific. Did a lot of work in the Marshall Islands and American Samoa, Palau, other places. And all the time, whenever I would go and help with local projects that these NGOs or other groups were doing, I would also carry out my reef fish survey methodology. And I was able to build a huge database of over 10,000 transects that I swam around the Pacific Ocean, and was able to build a really nice kind of meshwork of the interconnectedness of all of these islands based on reef fish abundance, numerical abundance, biomass abundance, and species presence absence lists at all of these places. And I looked at how they were connected and what factors might be leading to the distribution of certain species. And specifically what I was interested in was species that were able to make the really big jumps. So there are certain major distance gaps in the Pacific Ocean. Chief among those is for fish species and other marine species to get to Hawaii. And the stepping stone to get to Hawaii is a little place called Johnston Atoll, which sits kind of southwest of Hawaii. And it's really the only thing that really connects the Hawaiian reef system to some of those further southern and western islands. And so what I looked at was how the abundance of different species in the Marshall Islands, the Phoenix Islands, and the Line Islands, and different groups, how those impacted the likelihood of species making that jump to Johnston, and then further making that jump to Hawaii. As lots of you guys probably know, Hawaii has a huge number of endemic species, endemic reef fish species that only exist in Hawaii. And you know, the ancestors of those species had to get there from somewhere. And Johnston is believed to be the key. A lot of genetics work has supported that there's this kind of flow into Johnston and then up the Hawaiian island chain. And I was able to show that there was a really tight linkage in certain families of reef fish, that their abundance in this kind of arc of islands that kind of circumscribes Johnston, the really abundant species at those kind of gateway islands were able to make that jump to Johnston, which is a really interesting finding. And a lot of the information and thought before my work was that something called the pelagic larval duration was the more kind of, I don't know, impactful or the driving force behind the ability to make these large gaps. And certainly it does play a role. There's no question that the longer a species can maintain its larval stage and drift, that increases the likelihood that it makes that long distance voyage. But what I was also able to show is that the number of offspring produced at that source location also impacts the likelihood to make that jump. So not only is it how long can they stay in that pelagic world, but how many of them are sent in that pelagic world as well. So that was the focus of my research. It took me to all of these amazing, amazing places. And every time I went, I took camera gear, right? So I would spend, 5 hours a day swimming transects, but at the end of each dive, as soon as I was done counting and identifying all these fish, I would roll the camera and I started just shooting a ton of pictures, and I got good at it and started, showing folks the stuff that I was filming and built a little reputation. And now my phone rings and people want to hire me to go places to take pictures. And I know that I'm the luckiest human being on planet Earth because people pay me to do what I would pay them to let me do. So, no complaints here. I get to continue traveling and doing what I love, but knowing that I'm really, really lucky, and knowing that the things that I've seen, the places that I've gone to, these uninhabited atolls in the northern reaches of the Marshall Islands, you can't go there. Like, you can't just go to your travel agency and buy a plane ticket and fly to Ailinganai Atoll in the Marshall Islands. You can't do it. I've been able to go there, and being that lucky, I feel a big sense of responsibility to show people what I have seen and show people why what I've seen is meaningful, and to promote all of those things that need to be done to save those places and to save the people that depend on those places. So that's kind of the intersection of research and videography for me. And I think the next part of your question was, do I have any advice for how people can get into this? I feel lucky. I don't know how it worked out for me the way it worked out. If you want to do something in the world, keep doing it until you're good enough that you can earn a living doing it. And the fact that I can is hugely due to luck. And I'm not gonna lie, I've worked very hard. Some of these expeditions that I've been on have been grueling and have been taxing and have been dangerous. But I wouldn't trade what I do for anything. And definitely you can take photography classes, you can learn how to operate video cameras and things, but there's no experience, in my opinion, for just being out in the water and doing it, and then showing people what you've filmed or photographed and asking for feedback and taking all of that feedback and trying to do it better the next time you go out. And I think that applies to any pursuit, but certainly to underwater filmmaking for sure.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I was looking at some of the questions that we have in the Q&A, and I think they're specifically for you, Craig. So one person, Amanda, wants to know is, what is one memory that really stands out from when filming the documentary?
Sorry, what is one memory from what?
From when you were filming the documentary that really stands out to you?
Oh, okay. Gosh. Well, there's one memory from filming this documentary. The kind of late nights that we spent. So the camera systems that we use for this kind of a shoot, the data files that we handle are enormous, right? I'm shooting what's called 4K raw footage. So for me, on a single dive, I can shoot one memory card full of footage and it's 0.5 terabyte. And every dive, I would shoot 0.5 terabyte. You just shoot until you can't shoot anymore, and then you get out of the water and you refresh the cameras and you get back in the water. That's the game. So at night times, we were exhausted. We were out. Diving in American Samoa is largely done by truck. You don't have great tourist kind of infrastructure and dive support. We did not have a boat for this, so we were hiking our tanks and hiking our really heavy camera gear, across airport runways. We were exhausted by the end of the day. And then I would have to stay up till like 5 o'clock in the morning every night, dumping all of this footage. And, fun things happen in tropical islands at 4 o'clock in the morning. Things don't work on the time clock in these places. There's an expression that I love from the time when I lived in Palau. They would always say, it's not the time, it's the tide. And Palauan life, and in many islands, American Samoa, life is dictated by the moon, the phases of the moon, and how that impacts the rhythms on the coral reef. And if it happens to be that phase of the moon where, rabbit fish are spawning at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's fishermen that know that, and there might be a whole lot of activity at 3 o'clock in the morning and on a random Tuesday night in a place like Palau or American Samoa. And I don't know, you just find yourself in very interesting situations when you're when you're up at all hours of the night in small isolated island locations. So I don't know, this is a PG audience. I don't know how adult I could go into what transpires late at night in American Samoa, but it was a lot of fun. And I have lots of good friends down there who we enjoy spending time with. But I'll just leave it at that.
We gotta thank you for sharing from our question asker. So yeah, awesome. Adrian wants to know how you dealt with the emotional stress from watching reefs die like right in front of you while you're filming. Some of the emotional strain.
I've seen so much, and I've spent so much time filming bleached corals that I don't know if I'm immune to it or, when I'm underwater, I have a job to do. I know, I've got to get the right shot. I've got to get the right lighting. I've got I have a task to do. So when I'm actually there, I'm not really digesting it. It's not until after. And I gotta be honest, I rewatched Chasing Coral. It's only the second time I've ever watched it. I watched it last night, and there are scenes that I watched and I teared up because you, you don't, I didn't feel it at the time in the field. I knew full well what I was documenting and what we were there for. But I don't know. I mean, it's terrible. I don't know how to properly deal with it. We're in a really bad place in the state of the oceans right now. I don't feel good about the current state of the world's coral reefs, and it is hard to deal with, but we have to keep trying to make a change if we care about these things. And I really do care about these things. And I really want there to be healthy coral reefs for my kids. You know, I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. They're not yet divers. Hopefully very soon I'll find an instructor that'll certify them when they're young, and we'll start, you know, doing the exploring that I've loved to do in my life. But I want them to see more than just a rubble pile with a lot of turf algae growing on it. I want them to see a beautiful, healthy coral reef. And I know that I'm not alone in that. There are lots of people working to do this kind of outreach and education and science communication, but I mean, we're losing. You know, the reefs are not getting healthier right now. The reefs are suffering, and we need more. We need everyone who cares about these things to raise their voice and to start standing up and saying, hey, enough's enough. You know, I am going to ride my bike to work today, even though it's a little bit rainy outside, because I'm not going to burn that extra little bit of gasoline. Or, you know, I'm not going to eat that hamburger tonight. Instead, I'm going to have a piece of broccoli and some asparagus, you know, because I know that industrial farming adds to, you know, extra release of carbon. We just got to keep trying. We got to keep talking about this stuff, and we need to expand our bubble. We need to talk about these things to the uninitiated and the uneducated, for lack of a better word, the folks that haven't gotten this messaging yet. And that's, to me, the single most important thing that we can do is to make the bubble of understanding grow, help spread the knowledge that those of us who have spent time studying coral reefs, you know, what we've seen, what we've learned, just help the world get a better handle on it.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, is the power of just talking to people and spreading the word. I think one of the more formative experiences that I've had myself is just showing my grandmother corals at an aquarium. And I just assumed like everyone knows what corals are and why they're intrinsically important and beautiful. And she didn't even know that they're a living thing. And I, you know, she went through college and things like that. And I was just kind of like, let me tell you everything like about corals and why it matters. And you know, that discussion at the time, it didn't really seem like that important in the moment. But every time I saw her after that, she was always so interested in what was going on. Every time she saw a news article about it, she told me about it. And I know she's telling her friends about it too. And so I think that's just one kind of anecdote about how conversations with people is just so invaluable, in spreading the word and kind of stimulating this and bringing it to the consciousness of the general public. Um,
No
yeah.
question. And it'll happen one person at a time, you know. You keep doing that. Talk to your grandma, talk to your aunt, talk to your cousin, talk to a stranger at Starbucks, you know. Just keep talking. And we have to hope that the message finally gets through, because in my opinion, it still hasn't, despite the efforts of a lot of smart and caring and good people. We're still losing.
Well, following up on this, spreading the word and bringing this up and making sure people are aware that this is an issue, we have a question in the Q&A. I think I have a few ideas about how to answer it, but I'd be interested in what your thoughts are too, Craig. the questions from Amanda, and it's how can K through 12 educators bring more awareness to these issues?
Wow. Huge question. And, that is where it has to start. It's not just about training the next generation of grad students to get out there and do research. It's getting little kids interested, and they are interested, right? You put this kind of stuff in front of a kindergartner and a second grader and they eat it up. I mean, my kids love learning, right? They're at that age where they are sponges. They want to be fed this kind of information. And certainly coral reefs are not the only thing that we need to educate our children about, but even those kids that live in Kansas and that live in Nebraska, super far away from a coral reef, we gotta do what we can to get these things into the curriculum and to get some exposure in terms of specific methodologies and curriculum ideas. I'm not by any means a education specialist. There are people who study that. I would never want to step on anybody's toes and think that I know how to do what professional K through 12 educators spend their lives doing. I just know that we can do more. And I know that the thirst is there. I watch my own kids, they love watching Octonauts, the PBS animated show, which does a great job. Like they'll come into my room one night and they'll say, "Hey, Dad, have you ever seen a bumphead parrotfish?" And I'll say, "Well, as a matter of fact, I have. I've swam with a spawning aggregation of bumphead parrotfish." And they'll tell me, "Isn't it cool? They break off pieces of coral and eat them." I'll say, "Yeah, it is cool. And, we're going to go and swim with them as soon as you're old enough, and we're going to go do this." But we got to get kids involved. When I was first getting involved in coral reef stuff, I went to a really neat, super lucky, once again, experience that I was a part of. I went to Fiji with the Cousteau Society, and spent time with their scientist, a guy named Dick Murphy, really important, kind of instrumental guy in my early love of the ocean. And he constantly talked about Jacques Cousteau's refrain: people protect what they love, and they love what they understand. If we're going to get people on board to want to protect these things, we have to get them to love them. To get them to love them, we have to get them to understand them. And it's all through exposure, through education and repetition. Bring it up in kindergarten, hit it again in second grade, do it again in fourth grade, or every year. I would love there to be a coral reef portion of the curriculum for every school kid every year. We have to be realistic. They also need to learn to read and write and other very important tools, right? But more. All I know is we need more. Exactly what that will look like, I leave that in the hands of the professional educators to figure out. Whatever I can do to help them, they call me and say, "Hey, we need some pictures of a bumphead parrotfish chomping on a piece of coral." You got it. I'll bring it to you. I'm your guy. But keep talking.
Yeah, I agree. One of the thoughts that I had specifically for, I believe it was Amanda who asked that question, was there are ways to have scientists come into your classroom virtually through Skype a Scientist. So that is a program that can bring researchers into the classroom and share some of the information at a grade appropriate level. There's also a program where you can have a scientist as a pen pal too. So students would be able to work on their writing skills and their reading skills by communicating with a scientist via a written letter, which is really fascinating too. So I think it's a really interesting question, and one that you're totally like, I don't know how curriculum is dictated in K through 12, and it feels beyond my scope of practice to make any sort of suggestion or recommendation. But there are nonprofits out there that try to bridge the gap between K through 12 education and research.
Yeah, and I will add to your list another really effective tool are the citizen science projects, where um, there's a couple of really good internet kind of databases of them where you can find projects that students of all different ages can be data collectors and can get out there and do it. For coral reef kind of work, we have a limited number of people in the United States anyway that have immediate access to a coral reef, but certainly learning ecological methods and data collection and understanding the methodology of science is valuable no matter what kind of a citizen science project they get involved in. So I would encourage activity in those kinds of things too.
So we have a fish specific question from Darian. I wonder what your thoughts are on this. So when she was watching the film, she noticed that on the bleached algae covered corals, the only fish that seemed to remain were damselfish. And she wants to know, is this because damselfish are truly more present on bleached reefs, or are they more abundant from the start?
It's a great observation and totally accurate. A lot of the damselfish that do remain on severely bleached areas where it's been bleached for long enough that the algae starts to kind of take over, that turf algae is what comes in first, are Stegastes, the genus. They're sometimes called farmer fish, the group of damselfish that actually kind of nurture a plot and farm their own little area of algae and keep it kind of mowed down so that it is growing at its maximum rate. And a lot of the fish that are shown in those sequences in the film are those Stegastes damselfish. And yeah, they love turf algae. That's what they eat. That's what they hope to, have on the reef. But given enough time, when that dead coral skeleton and that turf algae is there, and these guys keep coming in and scraping at that little turf algae, it starts to deteriorate that coral skeleton. That calcium carbonate starts to weather away and it collapses. And once it collapses, there's no more structure. And then there is no place for that algae to grow. And there is no place for those fish to hide from predators. And there is no more that complexity of the physical structure of the coral reef that you have to have living corals for that to continue to exist. And once they bleach and that algae knocks them out, reduces it to a flat, asphalt pavement, the biodiversity just can't be supported. There aren't those spaces available anymore for other species of fish and invertebrates and crabs and shrimp and worms and anemones, crinoids, all of the things that make a coral reef the diverse, beautiful place that it is. They don't have anywhere to live. That's beyond being beautiful and being the symbol of health underwater in tropical environments. That coral is building the homes for everything else. That's why we need the corals. We don't really use corals. We don't harvest them. Maybe if you chew betel nut, you need to break off some coral to make your lime so you can grind up your betel nut and chew it. Or I don't know if there are maybe a few other human extractive uses of corals. Outside of the medical world, there are definitely medical uses of corals. But what we do need as humans are all of the things that depend on a healthy coral reef to survive, whether that's fish, whether that's sea cucumbers, whether that's certain types of algae that do grow on healthy coral reefs that we harvest to eat. It all depends on that structure. And without healthy, thriving corals, all of the rest of it goes away. So farmer fish are cool, but we want to see more than just farmer fish on the reef. Speaking of fish in the films, I always, I don't know how to frame this properly, but the director and the editor of Chasing Coral, they did a spectacular job. Phenomenal. I think they told the story really, really well. But as with any film project, there's a ton of stuff that didn't make the final cut. And one really cool thing that I shot in American Samoa that I was really hoping would get in is a sequence with a fish that kind of is going the other direction. So there are fish that eat coral, right? Talked about bumphead parrotfish, but there's also little guys. And this area in American Samoa where we were diving was all these Acropora branching Acropora corals, basically a single species covering kilometers of reef there. And there is a species of filefish called the long-nosed filefish, or the harlequin filefish, it's sometimes called, Oxymonicanthus longarostris. Beautiful little blue fish with yellow dots on it, just spectacularly beautiful. And all that this fish eats are the polyps of Acropora coral. Now, they're fun little fish. They let you get real close to them. They're super photogenic. And we got a sequence of two of them. They're often in pairs on a reef, you know, swimming through the branches of this soon to be dead coral looking for things to eat. And they couldn't, I mean, they didn't find anything to eat. The living tissue was largely disappearing at that point. And its impacts on real species of fish that you can watch happen. I mean, those guys have nowhere to go. All the Acropora dies, they're just going to starve. They can't change, they can't adapt and go eat, you know, Montipora or some other species of coral. It's just their body parts, and their design is, we need healthy Acropora to survive. And this was, you know, the last time those two long-nosed filefish probably will appear on a camera frame. But for many good reasons, the sequence didn't make the film. We had lots of other important stories to tell, but so many hours go into filming a movie like that, and so many great stories, you know, can't make the final cut. And I certainly understand the editor's choices and things, but I was hoping those guys made it in because they're one of my favorite little corallivore fish. And Leslie, I know you work on Acropora coral, and you know how spectacular and beautiful these things are. And it's not just that they're spectacular and beautiful, they do things, they have a function, they have a purpose, they support other life, right? That's beyond just being fun to look at coral. They are active members of an ecosystem.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that helped me recall this picture that I saw from someone who was working in an aquarium attending to the corals, where they had a fish. I'm not good with fish species, I apologize. But they had a fish who was laying eggs, and they have to clear the polyps around the branch of the Acropora in order to build their nest, essentially, like their little fish egg nest. And I typically don't hear about that in like the media or anything like that, but I think it's just a huge connection that the corals have with the fish species around them. Is they provide nurseries and habitat and food, and there's so much interconnectedness. So.
Yep, no doubt.
So we have another question. I think what we're just kind of talking about kind of answered Neil Hancock's question, who wants to know about the ways that bleaching impacts the food webs. So unless you have any other thoughts to add to that, I might move on to the next question.
Oh, sorry, I don't know. I'm not sure how to see the Q&A questions. What do I need to do? I don't know exactly what you're looking at. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question from Neil is just like, what discussion do you hear about the way the bleaching impacts the food webs?
What discussion do I hear about it? I mean, there's a ton of discussion about it among the scientists and the scientific community, right? We talk about these things all the time. There are so many important research projects going on about the interdependence of species with their healthy coral reef environment. What you don't hear is a lot of that discussion outside of the walls of research universities and outside of, you know, the NGOs that are doing important work. We need that to become part of the broader conversation. So
Yeah.
we all agree to try to do that.
So we have a question here from my advisor, Rachel Day. She says, thank you so much for joining us. One of the amazing things about Chasing Coral is the ability to reach a broader audience. And she's wondering what kind of action or impact you've seen that message have, and what advice do you give to folks who are alarmed about the decline of coral reefs and want to help?
It's such an important question. I mean, what is the message? What can we tell people to do? You know, there are so many things that we need to do. Top of the list, most scientists would agree with this, is to reduce carbon, right? Or carbon output. If we are able to do that, then there is a huge list of other things that we need to do. We need scientists that are working actively to figure out how to propagate corals, how to reseed reefs that have been devastated. We need, people working to clean up dirty waterways. We know the impact of runoff and terrestrial pollution on coral reefs. We need scientists working to, and not just scientists, activists, involved people, to restore mangrove habitat, to keep that sediment from smothering coral reefs. There's so many things that need to happen to return that nearshore coral reef environment to its once healthy state. It's real clear that, to me, to many folks, that the first thing is the carbon problem. You can clean up a river, right? You can clean up the water. You can limit fishing pressure in an area, overfishing, another huge problem in the coral reef world. You can do all those things, but if the physical setting of planet Earth is too warm or too acidic for corals to be able to grow, your efforts are for naught. And there's been a lot of discussion lately. I'm sure a lot of you guys are active on the Coral List email listserv. There's been a really interesting back and forth a couple weeks ago, really about kind of the debate between taking a very optimistic view of the state of things versus a more pessimistic, or in the eyes of many of the pessimists, the more realistic view of the state of things. And it's an important debate, I think. A lot of folks want to point to, the really good things that are happening in marine conservation. And there certainly are some steps that have been taken that are helping. Banning sunscreens, or, the designation of a new marine protected area. All great things, all important things to do. But to me, and obviously this is also the message of the film of Chasing Coral, the first thing is to get this carbon problem under control, because if we don't, and right now we're not, then all of the other stuff is just, baby steps towards maybe prolonging this inevitable death of corals on planet Earth for a couple of years or a couple of months. I don't know how long some of these things might help coral reefs be able to continue, but the carbon problem is just planetary. And there was some great news today. I haven't read all of what our new president spoke about today, but there are people that share this belief that want to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere. And I'm just going to keep talking about it. Hope that I can convince my grandma, or don't have a grandma anymore, but my nephews, or my, friends and colleagues, or people that I meet. And I don't know. I am on the more pessimistic side of things, but I'm not going to quit trying. You know, I know that the economic forces that drive the decisions for oil companies to continue selling us these gas guzzling cars, I get it. People want to earn a living, people want to make money on this planet. You know, we all have to do that to survive, but we can make smarter decisions and we can do things that have less of an impact the way that, you know, things have been going for the last 30, 40 years. It's just not sustainable. And we know that the science is strong. All of you guys who are doing important marine research, you know that. Every single study that continues to come back says, yeah, this change is happening. This change is happening. This water is more acidic than it used to be. This water is warmer than it used to be. We know how to stop that, and it's to get carbon out of the atmosphere.
Right, we're learning so much at such a quick pace, but the more we know, the more questions that we get, and we're running out of time. And so, yeah, it's very interesting to think about the realism versus the optimism, and how as researchers do we prepare for either. Happy birthday, Laura. Bye, Rick. Thank you so much. Sorry about that weird transition there, but yes, yeah, sorry about that. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A, and so I'm gonna kind of pick through them, but one Amanda wants to know is, what did you work with any indigenous tribes, and how was that experience, um, if you did?
Yeah, so not really during the filming of Chasing Coral. We were pretty restricted in that to working with some local expat scientists down there. But certainly in other parts of the world, that's a huge focus of what I do. I've done a lot of work, and even in American Samoa, I was involved in the early development of community-based marine monitoring program that's doing really cool things in American Samoa. It's totally vital in, you know, these small isolated Pacific islands that I go to and work in, to build that local capacity. And a big part of any of my efforts in these places is to not go in there as this outside American wealthy scientist and say, hey, you guys need to stop fishing on this reef because, you know, the science says you're killing your parrotfish over here and you need them to keep your reef healthy. It's to help local scientists get access to the resources they need to be able to communicate to their peers inside their community. I don't ever go into a situation and, you know, try to preach from the ivory tower of a research institution. It honestly does more harm than good in most of these places, but I always go in and try to find the partners who are looking for outside help to build capacity. It's a huge effort, and you know, there are starting to be more and more really well trained, and I hate to use that word, but scientifically trained local scientists in a lot of these places, and then they can take that scientific message to other people. Palau, for example, where there's a ton of marine science knowledge, but it's not, you know, university trained marine science knowledge. And now that there are some really, really good Palauan scientists who are doing important research, but they can speak to their Palauan friends and family members and people that live in their village about the scientific side of things. And it's so much more important to have the message coming from Palauans or from Marshallese folks than to have it come down from on high from an American who's largely responsible for the impacts that are happening on their coral reefs, right? It's not a Marshallese guy's fault that his coral reef is bleaching and no longer has the food fish that he needs. It's my fault. And for me to come in and try to preach some solution or impose some Western vision of, you know, sustainable coral reef usage, it's just preposterous and it creates animosity. But there are now the seeds have been planted and there are now some really good indigenous local scientists who understand. They don't have access, they don't have the money that a American research university might have, and they need tools and they need research assistants and they need things to help build their capacity. But having that work done locally is absolutely crucial for their local issues. Then when we start talking about that kind of big picture stuff of reducing carbon, we don't need to tell the guy in Rongelap Atoll to, emit less carbon. He's emitting 1/1000th of the carbon that I'm emitting and that my neighbors here are emitting. I need to go talk to the people on my street that don't have solar panels on their roof and say, hey, you guys can do something. You have the resources, you can reduce your impact. That I can do directly there. I can speak the language, I can interact with this culture that I am a part of. And then I can support indigenous culture, local scientists in their world when they need it. And I'm really blessed. I have a lot of partnerships around the Pacific. I've built a lot of relationships over the years, people that do ask for help. And I'm more than happy to give it whenever that kind of an opportunity arises.
I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that too, as a graduate student, building that connection with local communities who rely on these resources. From where I'm at now, and maybe other people can relate to this, it seems like it's kind of a large barrier to overcome. And I was just wondering what your advice would be for graduate students who have the interest in connecting with local communities who depend on systems in which they study.
My biggest piece of advice is to enter those situations and be genuine and be honest and listen and use your ears more than you use your mouth. Go to a place like Majuro or whatever and ask people what's their vision. Don't come down with some grand plan of a research project and say, okay, I'm going to hire Marshallese boat driver to take me to my reef sites and, I'll pay him good money and I'll bring jobs to his economy. No, go down there with your great plan, but then ask people, say, hey, would this be valuable to you guys? Would this be helpful to you if I tried to gain this piece of understanding, and explain what it is that you're trying to learn and how it will help them? There's so much exploitation of undeveloped parts of the world, of Westerners coming in and extracting knowledge and extracting resources. And, it's gross. You see it all the time if you travel. The ugly American, it's a real thing. We go and impose our will on other cultures. We have for decades and centuries. Go to listen and go to support what it is that those communities need to have done. I mean, when you're talking coral reef science and ecology, there's real people that depend on these things being healthy. We as scientists here in California or wherever we might be, we're going to be okay if the coral reef in the Marshall Islands collapses next week. We might even publish a paper out of it and build a career and, get notoriety in the scientific community. But there's human beings that are going to suffer because of that. So don't go into that situation imposing your preconceived set of beliefs, but go and listen. And it might completely change the focus of your research. You might get turned on to something that you had never thought about sitting here looking at, filefish in an aquarium before. But go and see what it is. What are people concerned about there, and support that. That would be my best piece of advice.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Let's see, I'm trying to think of some of the questions. Okay, so I have another question from Darian. Were people local to the places where you are filming interested in your work? And she's wondering if they would be interested in citizen science and helping to collect data or photography.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are people all over the world that I've met that want to do this kind of stuff. You know, it's not just school kids in the United States that want to get involved in citizen science. I have a friend who's based in Saipan who started for a while a really neat adopt a coral project, and he was doing a lot of really great outreach around Micronesia and getting Micronesian kids in different grade levels to go out in the water. They were trying to do once a week. That was a little too much. He started to get them out like once a month to go out and take a picture of the same coral head, you know, and send them all into his database that he was collecting. And he tried really hard. He got a lot of great involvement for a little while, but it just kind of petered off because he initially sent cameras to a lot of these schools. You know, they don't have the money to buy an underwater camera and stuff, but you know, the camera floods one time and doesn't get replaced, or you know, accidentally gets stepped on in the boat and they can't use it anymore, and his project slowly faded away. I was so sad to see it kind of go by the wayside. But if the resources are there, if you have the ability to support some kind of citizen science effort, the interest is absolutely there. And I mean, there's a ton of kids around the Pacific that have access to like really spectacular coral reefs where you could get citizen science data sent to you from places that are really hard to get to. And we're all connected, you know, there's internet now in the backwaters of Yap. Like you can email the chief of a village and say, hey, can you get, you know, a couple more pictures to us? We're really close. We have a good data set. We need you guys to get out there one more time. And you can communicate with these people from your desk, which is incredible. But yes, the interest is there. It's a lot of times the resources aren't. You know, these are poor parts of the world, at least the places that I've done a lot of work, and they need that money to make these things happen.
Yeah, thank you, Darian, for that question. We have another question that I think is interesting, where basically the premise is if temperatures were to go back to pre-industrial and the acidity levels became more basic, will coral recover spontaneously?
That's like the $1 trillion question, you know, have we gone over that tipping point? We don't know. There's a lot of really promising research on the temperature front there, and a lot of it actually has come out of American Samoa. There's a research location there, 2 little islands away from the kind of main island called Ofu and Olosenga, where there's a enclosed lagoon that scientists have been looking at for quite a long time. And it gets very, very high temperatures, even in non-El Nino or elevated temperature kind of years, just because it's an enclosed body of water. And the temperatures in this lagoon can reach, you know, like 90 degrees or warmer. And there are corals in there. And these corals have adapted and can survive at really, really high temperatures. And a lot of scientists have been looking at those corals. How is it that they're able to withstand those high temperatures? But then corals on the outside of the reef, once the water, you know, hits 86, they all bleach and they all die. There is a body of scientific research that predicts that corals will be able to adapt to a temperature change. If they can do it fast enough is a big question, because temperatures are rising so quickly. We don't know, you know, how quickly they're going to be able to repopulate with temperature tolerant individuals or species. But the acidity problem, I think, is posing a more real long-term threat, because what we're talking about when the oceans become more acidic is just the thermodynamics of producing calcium carbonate, that structure that corals need in order to grow, in order to outcompete algae so that they can harvest that sunlight that those algae, that zooxanthellae that live in the corals need, right? They have to keep growing. If they can't make calcium carbonate, they can't grow. Calcium carbonate dissolves in acid, right? The more acidic water becomes, the more metabolically expensive it becomes to make calcium carbonate. If corals and other organisms that make calcium carbonate, shells and skeletons, can't do that, there's no overcoming that. That's not an adaptation. That's just the energetic requirements that a higher level of acidity or a lower pH would mandate. And that, as far as I know, there isn't a lot of really good research showing that corals can adapt to strongly acidic water. The temperature, you know, maybe. If temperatures did come down to their pre-industrial levels, is there enough coral left right now to reseed the world? I sure hope so, but I don't know. And I don't know if anybody truly does. The devastation is huge and widespread. The amount of coral that's died on planet Earth is overwhelming. Huge percentage of reefs are gone, are dead. And you know, you got to have live corals there to make the next generation of baby corals. So your guess is as good as mine. If we've gone past that tipping point, I truly don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think on that note, we do have a few questions remaining. We're kind of coming close to our time here. But just really quick, I do want to get to this one question of what kinds of experiences do you recommend for undergrads who want to incorporate diving into their careers?
Dive, find a way. Get a job at an aquarium cleaning the tank. You know, if you don't have access to the ocean, get a summer job at a dive shop and work in their swimming pool and get in the water, get comfortable in the water, and wait for that opportunity to knock. You know, there are jobs in the scuba diving industry outside of marine science research. You know, you can make a lot of money as an underwater welder, for example. You can get paid to go scuba diving. You can earn some higher level PADI certifications and work as a tourist dive guide. How you can finance that, you know, it's a very expensive activity. You know, you got to get dive gear. It costs a lot of money to scuba dive. You know, look for grants, look for projects where they can give you dive training as part of the project. And you know, you don't have to scuba dive to research coral reefs. A lot of the most interesting stuff is happening in really shallow water that you don't need a scuba tank for. All you got to have is a bathing suit and some goggles, and you can get out on a coral reef. You've got to be, I guess you have to get to the location where there's corals, and in the United States, even Florida, where we once had coral reefs, those are mostly gone. So yeah, you're going to have to figure out a way to travel to a coral reef if that's the type of diving you want to do. But I don't know. I wish I had, like, you know, unlimited finances and I could send every student that wanted to learn about diving to a scuba camp and get them certified and get them a job as a scuba diver. I don't know exactly how to go about doing it. That's why I feel so lucky, because it did work out for me.
I definitely I think that there's going to be opportunities for people who are interested in diving and working that into their career, especially if it's going to take such an industrial scale effort for reef restoration across the world. Um, I mean, the scale is just enormous. I don't know how to articulate the scale. And we're still trying to figure out things that are the best. And so there are many different avenues forward that I've read about, as from planting microfragments out on reefs to spreading probiotics out on reefs that I'm reading about now. So I definitely think that there's going to be opportunities for people to work in reef restoration if that's something that they feel they want to participate in. So I think it's a really interesting question about looking forward and hopefully bringing some hope and actionable items to the future of the reefs. So
Yeah, and I would add to that, we've kind of just come through the scientific dark ages. The recent last few years have been an ugly time if you're a professional scientist. COVID aside, just the anti-intellectual, the anti-science folks were in control for the 4 prior years. Hopefully, and I think there are some great signs already from the new federal government administration. Hopefully, we can get back on track and get more dollars flowing into research projects and have more opportunities for this next generation of people that want to help make a difference. A lot of our research and university kind of work comes from federal government dollars, and those really were limited in the recent past. Hopefully, we're at the dawn of returning to where we once were or going beyond, because we certainly need to spend more money on marine and atmospheric research than we have been in the past. And I'm hopeful that the change in our government will lead to more available opportunities for folks. So keep our fingers crossed.
well, I'm going to close the Q&A now. Thank you all who participated, and thank you so much, Craig, for sticking around and answering these questions and sharing your stories. It's hugely invaluable, and thank you so much for the work that you've done with for archiving reefs and sharing the changes that are happening in a medium that you have taken on and really learned about and perfected. And so hugely grateful for you and your time here today. And yeah, thank you for everyone at the CMSI who coordinated this event and publicized it. And I think with that, I think that's it. So.
Thank you, Leslie and Rick and Carol and everybody, Jessica, everybody at UC Davis. It was a lot of fun. And, any of the people on the other side of the wall here, I can't see. I wish I could see all of your faces, but reach out if you have more questions. I'm always happy to talk further about things film and coral reef related. So thank you guys very much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody. Happy Earth Day.
And thank you, Craig, so much for joining us. It was really great to have you. I really enjoyed it. You had a lot of fortitude in staying with us for all this time. It was great. It's good to get to meet you. We'll be in touch really soon. Thank you, everybody who's still there, for joining us tonight. And we'll try and keep this alive. It was great to have you. Thank you, Leslie, too, for co-hosting, and Carol, and also Jessica Ramos for setting all this up and doing all the publicity. We're really grateful to all of you. Have a good evening. Earth Day was a good day in the United States. As many of you know, President Biden announced a goal of reducing carbon emissions by 50% by 2030 with a 2005 baseline, and even has a real plan to do it. So let's stand behind them and see if we can get there and save corals. Okay? Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Aloha.